Well, good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to the webinar. My name is Mike McCarty. I'm the CEO of Safe Hiring Solutions, and just want to mention a couple things real quick before we start. Have everybody muted, just cuts down on background noise, but if you have questions as we go through this, you've got a questions box over here in that dialog box where you signed in. You can post a question, and when we wrap up here in just a little bit, I'll go through each of those questions and answer those at the end. But otherwise, let's go ahead and get started. So SafeVisitor. SafeVisitor is a system we built about a year and a half ago, and just expands on kind of the safety security model that we've operated on at Safe Hiring for the past 11 years. So just as a bit of information, Safe Hiring has been in business for 11 years. We've got about 4,000 clients in all 50 states that we've done background checks for. And so a few years ago, we had a client that was asking for, hey, do you guys do anything to manage visitors or volunteers and vendors? And I said, actually, I have something on a drawing board, but I just haven't developed it yet. So that's really what prompted us to go ahead and move forward and develop this, because everything they were looking at was so terribly expensive, and I couldn't quite figure out why it had to be so expensive. And so we've developed this. We've had it in the field since late last winter, early in the spring. So we've got a number of clients that range from ministries to large school districts to corporate clients that are using this system to manage all types of volunteers that come to their organization. So basically what SafeVisitor does is it one, removes that book that you might have at a point of entry where somebody signs in, they're there for a meeting, they're there to visit somebody. I do it every day, all week long. I go to some what you would consider to be some highly secured facilities. They have security guards sitting at the front desk, and invariably, just like I did earlier this week, I signed in on a notebook. Nobody asked to see my ID. I could have been Charles Manson, and nobody would know the better. And so what we did is say, it doesn't make a lot of sense. If you're going to have that kind of security at your front desk, it needs to be a program that, really identifies who somebody is that's coming into the building, make sure that they can have access to the building, and just kind of raises that bar. So this system handles temporary visitors. It can handle and manage volunteers and also any vendors or contractors that are doing work with your organization. And so I want to start off with the temporary visitor just to show you kind of how that process works, and then we'll get into the volunteer and the vendor and how it manages that component. So this dashboard you're looking at is exactly what it would look like at your front desk attendant that's running the program when somebody enters the building. If it's a temporary visitor, and what we mean by temporary is Mike McCarty, I show up at your organization for a meeting. I'm low risk. I'm going to be there infrequently. So this is somebody that would be coming to your office maybe once or twice. So if somebody's coming there on a frequent basis, we're going to treat them as a vendor or volunteer, and we need to screen them at a higher level. So a temporary visitor would be that very unique person coming into the building very infrequently. And so I'm going to click on this button. You've got two options here. You can scan the barcode on the back of their government issued ID, and we support government issued IDs from all of North America. And so while I've got the webcam, I'm going to slow it down because I just want to show you a couple things. So on the back of your driver's license or your ID card, you'll see this 2D barcode. What it does, it basically encodes all the information from the front of your driver's license, and so it scans that, pulls that data into the system, as you can see. And as we move forward on a temporary visitor, it's going to print a temporary ID badge. And I'm going to show it to you because once I move forward, we're going to lose the webcam. And so it's going to print this temporary ID badge. It's a stick-on, so I pull this off and it affixes to my clothing. But it's going to say, clearly I'm a visitor. It's got my photo. You're going to snap that in a second with a webcam, the building I'm in. So if you have multiple buildings, what building you're in, the reason you're visiting, and I think now, this is an old one I had setting here, it actually says who you're visiting, and then the date and time. And you also notice this stop sign. And so when you print this, there's a little opaque sticker. This white opaque sticker goes over the stop sign. And the reason for that is after about 8 hours, that stop sign is going to bleed back through. So if you had a temporary visitor come in today and they try to re-enter your building tomorrow, it is going to be obvious that this ID, this temporary ID pass is expired and they're not going to be able to re-enter the building. It's also got a barcode at the bottom, you'll notice, so as they exit, they can just simply scan that temporary ID as they're leaving the building. The importance there is you also have all this information historically on visitors. So if you need to go back and determine when somebody was in a building, then you can run historic logs here. So again, take a quick picture of the webcam. All the information's been imported. You'll notice it's running a background check. And so what kind of background check that this just ran? It's two types of checks. So on a temporary visitor, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to search against the National Sex Offender Registry. And so it's a low-risk volunteer. And so the option is I can run a National Sex Offender Registry search. Depending on, your business and the nature of your business, you can opt to not run that on temporary visitors. So you might be a corporate client that is just managing visitors into your facility or location, but you don't necessarily want to run the sex offender registry search. You do not have to do that. We can shut that off or turn it on. If I'm working with vulnerable populations, I'm a school district, I'm a volunteer organization, then I may want to run the sex offender registry search. So that's one component that is optional on the background check. The other piece that is available on a background check is an exclusion list. And so what this exclusion list is, this is something you create on a client level. You maintain this, you add to it. So these are lists of people that are not allowed entry into your facility, or if you have multiple locations, it could be that they're excluded from one or two properties. But these are people that problematic ex-employees, or maybe you have an employee going through a divorce and a protective order has been issued against their spouse or ex-spouse. You could place that spouse or ex-spouse on the exclusion list so that if they tried to enter a building, it would flag them as entering the building. So you control all that functionality, and I'll show you that tool here in just a second. So the only thing that the front-end attendant has to do, they have to list the person they're visiting and the reason for the visit. And once they do that, it'll allow them entry, print the badge, and then it brings them back to the home screen. And so if I'm sitting here as a front desk attendant, first thing I'll notice, I know everybody that's in the building at any given time. So it's going to list them here below on my dash. We also added this function right here, this down arrow. So if somebody is leaving, you can scan that temporary ID badge, or you can simply just click on that down arrow and it will log them out. That's pretty much how it's handled on a temporary visitor. If when we ran the background check, there was any kind of hit, so a hit on your exclusion list or a hit on the sex offender registry, if you're using that tool, it's going to automatically text and email a preset group of contacts for your organization or for the building. And so it lets them know there's an emergency at the front desk, you have somebody on a no contact list or an exclusion list. And so it gets people working their way toward the front door to assist that front office personnel if in fact they need some assistance with somebody that's not going to be allowed entry. So that happens automatically. The other piece on this dashboard for the front office personnel is we created this emergency button. We placed it way up here out of the way so that nobody would accidentally hit it. And so what this button does is if I'm working at the front desk and I just have somebody come in and they become belligerent, or I'm having problems with them, or I need some assistance, but I don't want to pick up the phone, because picking up the phone, I have to say it out loud. It may further inflame the situation. All I have to do is just come up here and click this with a mouse, and it's going to send an emergency text and email to that preset contact group for that building so that they can get down there quickly and assist that front office personnel. So that's kind of how you handle the temporary visitors as they come in and out of your location. The other two pieces is really managing vendors and volunteers. And the vendors and volunteers all interact the same way. The difference between there's two options on vendors. So you can have an option on vendors that you say we're going to run them internally. So what that means is they'll apply through, your organization, you'll run the background check and you'll approve them. We also have an option where you can use a SafeVisitor Solutions module. No extra fee, doesn't look any different. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference on the dashboard because they're all integrated the same way. But what SafeVisitor Solutions does is it allows a vendor, when they've been credentialed, they'll go through SafeVisitor, Safe Hiring Solutions then will run the highest level background check, the same background check we would run for public school system. And then we would approve them. And once they're approved, they would be approved, and then any client that's running the SafeVisitor Solutions system, they can scan in and out of any location instead of just your location. So you've got two options there. The advantage for the vendor is if they're doing work in multiple organizations in a community, that they only have to get that background check that one time and not for each organization. We control how frequently they have to have a recheck, and quite honestly, we're at a year or 2 years, so we're trying to decide if we may make that an annual check or if we'll remain that they have a check every 2 years to maintain that certification. But regardless, how this works with a vendor or volunteer, they would have a link. So if this was your organization, you would have this link specific to your organization. They, select whether they're a vendor or volunteer. They input their information, which is basically the same process that I forgot to hit my scan button before I did that. I was trying to take a shortcut here. And once they enter their data fields, then they select a building. If you only have a single building, it'll just default here, and so they select the building. Once they do that, they go to the next step. This is where you would have an information or your visitor policy. So if you want your vendors and volunteers then to electronically agree to your policy, they would do that. Here's where it can work two different ways. So if you want to run your volunteers and your vendor background checks through Safe Hiring Solutions, then at this point in about 30 days, we'll have an integration completed where it will actually take your volunteer or your vendor and it will push them over to Safe Hiring Solutions where they e-sign for the background check, enter their social security number, and then it'll run the background check. Once the background check is complete, it's going to push it back over into SafeVisitor. And so when it comes back, if there is no criminal history, it will automatically approve your vendor or volunteer. And so when it approves them, what it'll do is it'll send them an email. They'll get an email that they've been approved. It'll also have an electronic ID badge attached to that email. And so there's no photo on the electronic ID badge that's sent initially. So the first time they visit your location, they'll have a barcode on that EID pass. It looks just like a boarding pass, and they would scan in from their smartphone, and when they scan in the first time, it's going to notify the attendant, hey, they don't have a photo, please take their photo. They snap it with the webcam, and literally probably 2 minutes later, as they're walking down the hallway to where they're going in your organization, they'll get another email with an attachment that'll have their new EID badge that actually has the photo in it. And so vendors and volunteers can enter and exit your facility by scanning in and out with that electronic ID badge. If you want to print a hard-coded badge, and so you issue those and they'd have them on a lanyard or however you would do that, you have the option within SafeVisitor to print a hard-coded badge where they would scan in and out with that hard-coded badge. So it becomes optional. They'll automatically get an electronic one, and then you could print a hard badge if you opt to do that. You also have the option here, so we built this because we have some clients, some large public schools where we do all their employment and their vendor background checks but they run their own volunteer background checks through a state system. And so at this point, if that's what they were doing, it would actually approve them, or I'm sorry, it would actually store that registration, and then they would go in, pull the registrations out, run their manual background check, and manually approve them. So the only time that you're going to get involved if you're running this through Safe Hiring, the only time that you're going to have to intervene is if a volunteer or a vendor has a criminal record. It will flag them and pend it, and then you will have to go in and manually review any pending reports with criminal histories to determine whether or not you're going to approve them or deny them. And so normal hit ratios for criminal background checks about 10 to 12%. So if you had 1,000 volunteers, 900 of them are going to be automated, and so you're only looking at 100. So, you know, to put it in perspective, it really takes a lot of this process and turns it into an automated process. So as I go back over here to SafeVisitor, when I look over here, I got a flyout. As an administrator, you have this functionality to set up these contacts like we mentioned, and as you set up these contacts, that can be on a building level. And so who is the emergency contact per building? You can also set up an administrator with a notification. So maybe I'm a director of security and I'm not necessarily in the building, but I certainly want to know when we've had an incident in a building, and so they can also be notified as well. You've got visitor logs, and so it's not going to be a whole lot of data in here. We're on a demo site, but it keeps a history of everybody that enters and exits your facility. This has already become an important component for one of our large clients. They had an issue, and I don't know the foundation of the issue other than the person was denying they had ever been in one of their buildings. And they were able to come into SafeVisitor, run a report, and determine they were actually in a building on this date from this time to this time, and it was it ended the whole issue that they were having with that person. And so it provides that, you know, important piece of information if you historically ever need to know who's in a building at a given date or time. You've got this registrations page. This pending page, as we're working through the integration, I think this is where you're going to see, the only things you're going to see on the pending page are those that get flagged because there is some kind of adverse information. Or if you're manually running your own background checks, they'll come in as pending and you'll have to run a log, run your background check, and then manually approve them by clicking this button right here. You can also scroll through, you'll be able to see your approved, those that have ID badges, anybody that's been denied. And so that's how you can look through your registrations. If I need to look for somebody, I've got a search box down here. This is how you manage your exclusions, so administrators can manage the exclusions. You only need a first and a last name to enter somebody on the exclusion list. The more information, if you had a date of birth, that's even better. You can set that again as global, so all of your facilities or properties, or just at a building level, and then you would select a building that they're excluded from. Reasons why, you can add notes, and you can activate and deactivate people from the exclusion list. So maybe if it was a court order related reason why you put them on an exclusion list and that court order is lifted, then you could come in here and inactivate them if you wanted to. You control all the functionality with adding administrators, attendants. So your attendants that are actually managing the system at the front desk, I mean, basically they're going to have access to the dashboard, and they're not going to have access to registrations, the visitor log, exclusion list, any of that information. That's all an administrative function. And that is pretty much what SafeVisitor and SafeVolunteer can do for your organization. So I'm going to pause for a second and see if we have any questions. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. If you do, please feel free to email me or contact me at 888-215-8296. Otherwise, we hope you have a great day. Thanks.